Sheryl Crow and All I Want to Do on 936 ABC Radio Hobart and ABC Northern Tasmania. Pardon me. It is Afternoons with Joel Reinberger. We're going to talk about a bit of Tasmanian history with a man who's written a book about an Irishman going through the grind of the probation-era convict system. Up next.
I love sport, but racism has always been there. Do we just put up with things the way they are?
The brand new series, Endgame with Tony Armstrong.
There are solutions.
Stream all the episodes now on ABC iView. Listen live on digital, online or your smart speaker. Or catch up anytime, anywhere with the ABC Listen app. This is Afternoons with Joel Reinberger on 936 ABC Radio Hobart and ABC Northern Tasmania.
Rob Donnelly's first book was a memoir so interesting, he appeared on Conversations to talk about it. He'd joined a contemplative monastery and committed himself to the life, but eventually found he had to leave. So you know that Rob is a thoughtful man. Anyone even considering that life of the mind must be. And he's turned that thoughtfulness to the convict system, what it was like to live under it. His new book, Con, is being launched on Saturday. G'day, Rob. How are you doing?
G'day, Joel. I'm doing really well, and thank you for that lovely introduction.
Now, your dad is the inspiration behind the book. Tell me about that.
Yeah, look, I really see the book began with my father, Don Donnelly. When he retired in the late 1980s, his first sort of retirement project was heading over to the state library and sitting in front of the microfiche machines and, doing the search, and he came up with the convict records of our ancestors. And I remember him bringing them home. They were a little bit sketchy, the quality of the prints, but we were able to make out a few basic details about these ancestors, and it was very exciting. So, yeah, Dad really launched the whole project.
Okay, then. So is this directly about your family, or is it just about what you've discovered about the world and the system along the way of finding your family?
Look, it's kind of about the whole lot, to be honest. So there's been a couple of decades of extensive research about this fella, Cornelius Donnelly, or Con, and, where we've kind of fleshed out an awful lot of detail about his life. And that's largely thanks to things like Trove, the National Library's website. We've been able to discover an extraordinary range of things about him, but also a lot of research about Belfast, where he originally came from in the 1840s. Pretty tumultuous place there, and then coming out to Van Diemen's Land, what Van Diemen's Land was like in the 1840s. And look, in a lot of ways, it was a bit of a powder keg at that time.
So tell us a few facts about Cornelius as we know him historically.
So he was a young man when he was arrested. So he and his brother James, they lived in Belfast. They were a thing called flax dressers. So flax is a little bit like straw, and it's a thing that's used to produce linen. So these fellas, they worked in the factories and they fed the flax into machines, stripped it, got the supple little strands that were woven into linen. But obviously, they were pretty poor. They were poor factory working fellas. So to supplement their money, they stole some clothes and they were caught. And they had previously been charged and had some time doing hard labour for stealing watches. So they had a bit of form. And so this time around, they got the 7 years transportation sentence.
Now, what did you find out about what life was like in Ireland in 1843? Give us a picture of Belfast.
Well, look, it was a pretty kind of hefty place to live, I guess. It was so we're talking about the 1840s. So we had this enormous figure, this man Dan O'Connell, was on the rise, and so there was a lot of politics happening in terms of monster meetings. Lots of people coming along, wanting an independent Ireland, wanting self-government, and they were really pushing for that because at that time Ireland was governed out of London, out of the British Parliament. So there was that real push for independence. At the same time, there was a lot of contention in Belfast itself because you had the Catholics and the Protestants, so you had that social divide. And the English government actually had suppressed the marching season, which is a really big deal for Protestant Belfast in terms of getting out and marching and the orange flags and all those sorts of things. So that was being suppressed. So again, it was to try and keep the peace, but I think in actual fact it contributed to a very inflamed atmosphere.
Was it a place with a lot of poverty at the time?
Absolutely. It was a place of great poverty. People worked in the factories when they could get that work, but it was very much slum conditions. The circumstances were basically tenements. So, a lot of disease, struggling to pay the rent, struggling to put food on the table. It was a pretty bleak environment to grow up in.
Now, who was likely to get transported? Like you mentioned that Con and his brother had some form.
Yeah.
Is that the sort of person who's, a second or third offender that they're going to just go, let's just get rid of them? Or was there also maybe some class or religious factors in that?
I think, it being a second offence was a contributing factor because we can actually look at a newspaper report of the assizes on that day, and a lot of people who did similar crimes to the two Donnelly boys, they were generally getting 6 months or 9 months hard labour in Ireland. So I think that the Donnellys got transportation because of it being a second offence. But no doubt there were issues of class at play in all of that too, and probably also sectarian factors.
What did they know about their destination? You find out you're being transported to Van Diemen's Land. What even do you know about it as someone who works in a factory in Belfast in the 1840s?
Well, look, very little. I suppose there's an interesting dimension in that obviously there were people sent out here who communicated back home, whether it was back home to England or Ireland. So there was some familiarity in terms of correspondence that came from people who had gone out. And I know even as far back as the 1820s, there was a parliamentary inquiry into the convict system in Britain. And they were saying some people were intentionally committing crimes to be sent out because they'd heard from mates who'd gone out before that it was a pretty good place to be. So there was a bit of information feeding through. And of course the convict cannibal story here in Tassie, that got big play in both Ireland and England. So there was a familiarity with some of these stories that were going back there, and I suppose they were trying to build up a sense that this is a terrible place to be sent to, so you really should not commit crime. So they're trying to kind of influence things that way. But at the same time, they're also wanting people to come out as free settlers. So I think, the system was in a bit of a bind with that.
You're listening to ABC Radio Hobart and ABC Northern Tasmania Afternoons with Joel Reinberger. Author Rob Donnelly is with us. He's got a new book which is coming out on Friday called Con, which is about Irish convicts coming here. Now, you've described this book, and I love the phrasing you've used here, Rob, as a man going through the grind of the probation-era convict system. What was that grind? What was it like to be living under it?
So it was kind of designed to be very hard initially, especially. So when you came off the boats, you were in gang labour. So you were kind of at the lowest rung. You were put on the hardest work. So we drive around Tassie today on so many roads through the country. Many of those roads were built by gang labour, by convicts out there with their picks, with their shovels, breaking stone, clearing land. And so it was really very hard. And I think we make a mistake when we kind of lean into the official accounts of conditions, because the official accounts are designed to give the best possible impression, particularly back to the UK. But if you look at things like the writings of some of the Canadian convicts, and they give accounts of the probation system, it was bleak. You didn't get enough food. I remember a description from one of those Canadian convicts talking about the food was picked over by people up above you, and then you got the dregs. So you were struggling with hunger. You were doing really hard labour, and it was pretty hard going.
How would you get out of that into a better situation, onto a farm? Often, you'd be like, effectively farmed out to a farmer, or become a servant in a house, something, or become a bit more of a useful man rather than just slave labour, effectively.
So it was an interesting time. So the probation era, so the probation system replaced what was there previously, which was an assignment system. So previously, up until around the 1840s, you came off the boat. If you were well behaved, you would be farmed out kind of straight away to be working on a farm or being a servant or whatever. The probation system was structured so if you behaved well, then you got out of gang labour, and progressively the kind of work you were doing was easier. And then you'd arrive at the point where you had a probation pass and you could be hired out. So you could then go out and you could work, and you were paid for that work. The money landed in a bank account, so you couldn't kind of access all of it. So you kind of had to keep your head down and behave well, and you just kind of worked your way through that system. And then at the end of all of that, you were somebody out for hire. And then in time, you'd get your ticket of leave and certificate of freedom.
So my understanding is, Rob, you've effectively novelised this movement of your ancestor through there. Has it been a real change for you? Because, your first book was a memoir. It's all about you and your own experience. How's it been turning that around and looking at that external vision of something?
Well, look, it was a challenge. So kind of in the very quite a few years ago, and I've been interacting with an editor who's based in Ireland for this, and at one stage I kind of had a book that was kind of partly history and some speculation, and the editor said to me, you've got to discover what this book's meant to be, and for me, deep down, it was kind of a bit of a daring proposition. I felt this was meant to be the voice of my ancestor. So it is a novel. It's using all the facts we know, but it's really aiming to speak in his voice. To almost, in contemporary terms, a bit like a live stream from going through that experience as it happens. But it's taken a bit to get there, and a bit of an emotional journey, to be honest with you, because I think we all want to hear, we'd all love to hear the voice of our ancestors,
yeah.
I think.
Absolutely we would. Where are you launching the book? How are you going about doing that, Rob?
Well, look, he was an Irishman, and to be honest, he really, really liked to drink. So we're doing a launch. We've kind of got invitations out for people. A launch at the new Sydney Hotel in Hobart. So it's the right place, and we're banging on Guinness pies, and Con will be shouting people a drink. So it'll be a bit special, I think.
And can people pick up your book in bookstores?
Yeah, so look, as things stand, we've got the book at Fuller's and Hobart Bookshop, so they've got copies which will be out on Saturday, the 1st of November, and hopefully we'll get some books out up north as well, Petrarch's and a few other places. But if you roll up to a bookshop and it's not on the shelf, you can certainly ask the people, and they're able to order it in. And it's also available online.
Cheers, Rob. Good to talk to you. Thank you kindly.
No worries at all, Joe. Thank you.
Author Rob Donnelly, and his new book comes out on the weekend. It is called Con.